We all know George Washington, right? The guy on the dollar bill, the hero of the American Revolution, the president who couldn't tell a lie. But what if I told you the real story is much darker? He was known by another name, a terrifying one, Town Destroyer. He was a man who ordered brutal punishments, relentlessly pursued people who escaped his control, and whose actions reveal a shocking side to our national hero. Get ready, because today we're pulling back the curtain on the ugly truth about George Washington. Let's start with that famous story about the cherry tree. You know the one, "Father, I cannot tell a lie. I did cut it with my little hatchet." It's supposed to teach us about his honesty. Well, surprise! The story is completely made up. It was invented by a biographer named Mason Locke Weems decades after Washington died, basically as a piece of propaganda to sell books and create a flawless national icon. This myth-making is common in history, but it stops us from seeing the real, complicated person behind the legend. And speaking of legends, the one about Washington being a brilliant military genius? That's also a stretch. In fact, he lost more battles than he won. His early military career was marked by disastrous decisions. At Fort Necessity, his overconfidence and poor planning led to a humiliating surrender. It was a failure so big it actually helped spark a global conflict. He wasn't some invincible general. He was a fallible human who made some very costly mistakes. One of his biggest blunders helped ignite the French and Indian War, which later became the global 7 Years' War. As a young officer, Washington led a surprise attack on a small French diplomatic party led by Joseph Coulon de Villars de Jumonville. The ambush resulted in Jumonville's death, a massive international incident. The French were furious, calling it an assassination. This single act of aggression was one of the key sparks that set North America, and then the world, on fire with devastating consequences for everyone involved. But Washington's violence wasn't just directed at the French. He earned that terrifying nickname, Town Destroyer, or Conotocaurius, from the Iroquois people. Why? Because during the Revolution, he ordered the Sullivan Expedition, a brutal campaign with explicit instructions to cause the total destruction and devastation of Iroquois settlements. His soldiers burned over 40 villages, destroyed crops, and left countless families to starve or freeze to death. This wasn't just warfare. It was a policy of terror designed to break the spirit of Native American communities who had allied with the British. The trauma from these acts has echoed through generations. Now, let's talk about the most glaring contradiction in Washington's life: his relationship with slavery. George Washington was a slave owner from the age of 11. He inherited 10 enslaved people from his father and spent his entire life expanding his holdings. Through his marriage to Martha Dandridge Custis, he gained control of hundreds more. He was known among his neighbors for being a harsh master, and he continuously profited from the forced labor of men, women, and children. While he was fighting for America's liberty, he was denying it to the people he owned. This brings us to his deep hypocrisy on the issue. Publicly, Washington sometimes expressed a discomfort with the institution of slavery, calling it a great evil. But his private actions told a different story. He continued to buy and sell human beings. When he moved to the presidential home in Philadelphia, he exploited a legal loophole to rotate his enslaved workers back to Virginia every 6 months, preventing them from qualifying for freedom under Pennsylvania law. He talked the talk of abolition but refused to walk the walk, because his wealth and lifestyle depended on slavery, and it gets worse. In 1793, President Washington signed the Fugitive Slave Act into law. This federal law made it a crime to help an enslaved person escape, and gave slave owners the power to recapture them anywhere in the United States, even in states where slavery was illegal. It essentially turned the entire country into a hunting ground. This act didn't just protect slavery, it strengthened it, making the dream of freedom a far more dangerous and nearly impossible pursuit for thousands. One person who dared to dream of freedom was Ona Judge. She was one of Martha Washington's most trusted personal attendants, but she lived in constant fear of being given away as a wedding present. So, while the Washingtons were eating dinner one night, she walked out the door and never came back. With the help of Philadelphia's free black community, she boarded a ship to New Hampshire and began a new life as a free woman. When asked years later if she regretted leaving the Washingtons, she famously said, "No, I am free and choose to remain so." But Washington refused to let her go. He became obsessed with recapturing her. He placed ads in newspapers, offering a reward for her return. He used his political connections to try and track her down, even asking federal officials to essentially kidnap her and her newborn child by force. He tried to trick her into coming back, promising a pardon if she returned voluntarily, which was a lie. His relentless pursuit of Ona Judge reveals his true priorities. His property and his power were more important to him than her humanity and freedom. Even the seemingly harmless myths about Washington hide a disturbing truth. You've probably heard he had wooden teeth, right? Well, that's not true either. His dentures were crafted from a grim mixture of ivory, metal, and horrifyingly human teeth. And where did he get those teeth? Records show he purchased them from the very people he enslaved at Mount Vernon. Just imagine the horror of that transaction. It's another sanitized story that covers up a deeply uncomfortable reality about the man. Near the end of his life, Washington supposedly had a change of heart. His will is often held up as proof of his moral evolution because it ordered the emancipation of the people he enslaved. But here's the catch. The will stipulated that they would only be freed after his wife, Martha, died. This put the enslaved people in an impossible and dangerous position. Fearing they might try to speed up her death to gain their freedom, Martha freed them about a year after his death. But even then, over 150 people who were part of Martha's estate remained enslaved, passed on to her heirs. It was a limited gesture that came far too late, so who was George Washington? He was a man of immense contradictions. He was a leader who fought for the principle of liberty while actively denying it to hundreds of people he held in bondage. He was a general who preached discipline but practiced extreme cruelty against his enemies. He was a founder of a nation built on ideals he himself failed to live up to. To call him simply a hero is to ignore the deep moral conflicts that defined his life and legacy. Understanding the real George Washington isn't about tearing down a national icon for the sake of it. It's about acknowledging that history is messy and our heroes are rarely perfect. The man who is called the father of his country was also a town destroyer and a relentless slave owner. We have to be willing to confront these uncomfortable truths, not to erase the past, but to understand it more honestly. By facing the full complex story of our history, we can learn from its darkest chapters and work towards building a more just future. Thanks for watching, and if you want to keep digging into the hidden side of history, make sure to subscribe.